young people, if you don't mind me saying so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, you have wondered whether the Speaker minds what you say.
Yes, sir.
The Speaker does mind. So please stay on the line.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Speaker. You know, I grew up in an area where the Speaker lives, you know, so I respect him very much. So, Mr. Speaker, that is on the East Coast, Golden Grove, but for those of you who don't know. But I come from Borbice as well. So, Mr. Speaker, is this document questioning the CXC? Is this document questioning our vocational qualifications? Is this document questioning the much celebrated TVET program? Mr. Speaker, the government also said in this document on page 6, 1, 2, 3, the third paragraph, the last line, youth development has been disjointed and suboptimal. Mr. Speaker, again, I would like to say that over the past 17 months, youth development in Guyana has been disjointed and suboptimal. We need more from this government where youth are concerned and young people are concerned. Mr. Speaker, again, it speaks about existing youth development actors and programs. And there is a great pictorial depicting the key development actors. But in the 21st century, as a matter of fact, in 2016, and we are speaking about growing this economy and about revolutionizing young people in Guyana. But one of the key actors in youth development is technology, but it is missing as one of the actors in this depiction. Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is missing. Technology is missing. The special interest groups are also missing, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, if we were to go to page, I missed the page now, but anyway, the vision for Guyanese youth. And it speaks, Mr. Speaker, the first vision. A nation where all young people are safe, healthy, and included in a society in which they have access to equal opportunities, participate in public life, and are empowered to meaningfully contribute to Guyana's sustainable national development. Mr. Speaker, I'd be proud to celebrate this vision. But we live in a country with rampant crime, with rampant joblessness, with rampant lack of opportunities. Mr. Speaker, we live in a country of rampant blackouts too. Where I live, unfortunately, I cannot afford a generator, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, I can't afford to buy a generator. So when I try to make my porridge, blam, the blackout comes. I can't make porridge, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the document also speaks, listen to this, Mr. Speaker. This is the vision of the youth that I just spoke to. But listen to the government's vision for youth. A nation in which young people are united, educated, trained, safe, happy, healthy, and integrally involved in the decision-making process, inter alia. Mr. Speaker, if you walk this road at any given moment in this country, no one feels safe. Mr. Speaker, at one point in time, there was a high leader in this government who said that suicide is a result of unhappiness. Mr. Speaker, today, it is more rampant than any other time in the history of this country. The young people of this country are unhappy, Mr. Speaker, and residents of the government on the other side of the House. We do not feel, Mr. Speaker, that young people are fully integrated in the decision-making process of this country. And I do not intend, Mr. Speaker, to once again use the classic example of the cabinet. I do not want to use the classic example of the advisors of the government. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to use the classic example of the advisor on national youth empowerment. I don't want to use the example of the head of the Hinterland youth scheme, 54 years old. May I remind my Amerindian comrades, brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, on the next page, it speaks about initiatives that will follow. And this is where I find a fundamental problem. a whole set, Mr. Speaker, of things that are preached upon our young people. Mr. Speaker, my question is, why is this government continuing to use condescending language on our young people? For example, they must be aware of themselves, know and exhibit self-worth. What are we speaking about? Huh? Who are we? Who do you think you're talking to? Huh? Who do you think you're talking to? Huh? Who is more patriotic than me and actively involved in the development of Guyana? Huh? Which one of you possess stronger leadership qualities than the hundreds and thousands of young people in this country? How many of you are well-read, well-rounded and involved in social activities? This is what, huh? So why, Mr. Speaker, why does this government continue to use condescending language on the people of this country? Why? Especially the young people of this country. Why? It is 2016. You can't speak. When President Jagdeo was president, he was 35 years old. And that is a celebration for this country. He was 35 years old. He was a youth. And Mr. Speaker, as I'm on that note, there is no one from this government side will ever achieve what President Jagdeo has achieved as president of this country. And there will be no one in this country who will achieve anything under this current government than what President Jagdeo has done for Guyana. So, Mr. Speaker, this here is a glorious deflection. Mr. Speaker, it is a glorious deflection of the incompetence of this government towards young people of Guyana. And I say to you again, Mr. Speaker, and of course to our young people of this country, we need to ensure that this document becomes a real policy, a policy that is going to affect positively their lives. Mr. Speaker, the document also speaks to the principles that govern youth development in Guyana. It speaks of adopting a rights-based approach. But then earlier, Mr. Speaker, I was telling you that it is my personal view that something is unconstitutional on the basis of this document. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, there are many young people who are scared to say what they have to say now in this country. Many, many young people. Thousands of them are scared to express themselves. They're very scared to express themselves. Mr. Speaker, Principle 5, adopt an evidence-based decision-making approach. Mr. Speaker, you know, as I go through here, I'm going to laugh a little bit. I hope you don't mind, sir. But yet, there is no evidence, like I said, in substantiating this document. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to grin at this one. Then Principle 6 speaks of developing an enabling environment, and I laugh again, Mr. Speaker. Because the government says it will endeavor to create and support an enabling environment for youth development. And Mr. Speaker, I will go back again and say, Mr. Speaker, Principle 7 says, advance good governance. But Mr. Speaker, do I really need to go and expound on this? It speaks on good governance, but hear what it says, Mr. Speaker. One of the key components of this approach is the formation of an interministerial committee. Mr. Speaker, of all the ministers of government that sit before us, and maybe those who are not in here right now, how many of them are going to be sitting on this interministerial committee, and how many young people are going to be on this interministerial committee? The mere fact that it is an interministerial committee, it is led by an overage minister of government. So this, Mr. Speaker, in itself is opposite to what we want to achieve in this policy. It speaks about the government's subscription to the tenets of good governance. But, of course, Mr. Speaker, I told you just now that 0.6% of the young people of this country were involved in the consultation. And then when it speaks about good governance, about equity and equality, we refuse to mention the Amerindians, a special people, our first peoples of Guyana. Why is this government scared to say Amerindians? Why is this government refusing? And we have an Amerindian Act, you know, Mr. Speaker, not an Indigenous Peoples Act, an Amerindian Act that describes what an Amerindian is. And still yet this government refuses to address the needs of our Amerindian people. And as a matter of fact, I hinted to Vice President Ali Koch earlier, Mr. Speaker, that I got a report that 4 young Amerindians from Tusaning in the North Pacaramas, they walked away from the GTI program because there was no money available to them, because when they went to the ministry, no one was looking after them. So 2 days ago, they decided to pack their traps and they headed back to the mountains of the North Pacaramas. This is what this government is doing to our young people, especially our young Amerindians. They have come here, Mr. Speaker, for hundreds of miles against conditions totally alien to them, and still yet this government has no respect to at least cherish their presence, to deal with them, to treat with them. Not even a single audience of the minister or any one of the ministers in addressing the concerns of our young Amerindian people. But of course, Mr. Speaker, I will continue. Mr. Speaker, the document speaks to youth development policy priorities. And it speaks about youth identity and empowerment. And specifically speaks to arts, sports, and culture, but refuses to speak about education, about documenting history, and about, as the Honorable, to use a term from the Honorable German Figuera, presenting a
Honorable
worldview.
member.